Did theaters really stop these horror films while shocked audiences were still watching? In some cases, police seized the prints. In others, censors rejected them before the projector could even start. A few were cut so badly that entire scenes disappeared for decades. Tonight, we uncover 32 horror films from the 1960s that frightened authorities, angered critics, and pushed cinema beyond what theaters were prepared to show. Subscribe to the channel, because the most controversial entry was kept away from audiences for nearly a decade. Number 32. Horrors of Spider Island, 1960. A routine flight to Singapore becomes a tropical nightmare when the aircraft crashes near an apparently deserted island. The survivors, mostly dancers traveling for a performance, believe they have found safety inside an abandoned cabin. Instead, missing supplies, strange footprints, and a giant spider suggest that the island is not nearly as empty as it first appeared. The most memorable moment arrives after the group's manager is attacked. Rather than simply disappearing, he returns with a frightening new appearance, losing more of his human behavior each time he enters the darkness. His transformation turns a light adventure into an unexpectedly strange creature feature. Censors were troubled by more than the monster. Revealing costumes, suggestive situations, and the transformation scenes made the production difficult to classify in several territories. Different versions circulated under alternate titles, with footage removed or rearranged to make the movie easier to book. Today, the rubber creature may look harmless, but audiences in 1960 were seeing beach glamour, mutation horror, and forbidden attraction mixed inside the same unusual film. Number 31. Anatomy of a Psycho, 1961. Revenge controls every decision after a troubled young man becomes convinced that his executed brother was treated unfairly. Instead of accepting the verdict, he begins targeting the people he believes were responsible, turning grief into an excuse for increasingly dangerous behavior. One of the strongest sequences follows him into a dark junkyard. Hanging chains, crushed cars, and narrow pathways create a metallic maze where ordinary machinery appears almost alive. There is no supernatural creature waiting in the shadows. The horror comes from watching an angry mind search for reasons to continue. Despite the title, this is closer to crime noir than a traditional monster picture. Yet its cold treatment of revenge, youth violence, and psychological collapse made it too severe for some examiners. British censors initially refused to classify it, effectively blocking normal national cinema distribution. The rejection only increased curiosity. Viewers heard that a film carrying the word psycho had been considered unsuitable, and the forbidden reputation became stronger than any advertisement. Its most disturbing idea remains simple. Once the main character decides that his pain makes him innocent, almost anything can be presented as justice. Enjoying these forgotten censorship stories? Hit the like button and tell us which film surprised you most. Share the video and subscribe, because the movies become much more controversial from this point forward. Number 30. The Brain That Wouldn't Die, 1962. A brilliant surgeon refuses to accept loss after his fiancée is critically injured in a car accident. Using experimental equipment, he preserves her living head inside his secret laboratory while searching for another body to complete the procedure. The unforgettable image is painfully direct. A conscious woman rests inside scientific machinery, able to think and speak but unable to move or escape. She slowly realizes that the man claiming to rescue her is willing to destroy other lives to rebuild hers. Something else is locked behind a laboratory door. Its heavy breathing and sudden movements reveal that the surgeon has already created another failed experiment. When the hidden creature finally emerges, the movie shifts from uncomfortable medical drama into full monster chaos. Distributors shortened the picture before its wider release, removing footage considered too intense or too slow. Its arrival was also delayed while promoters decided how to advertise such a troubling idea without frightening away theater owners. The effects may now look theatrical, but the central question remains disturbing. Is survival still a gift when the person being saved never agreed to the experiment? Number 29. The Curse of the Werewolf, 1961. A child born under tragic circumstances grows into a gentle young man named Leon, yet an ancient curse begins controlling him whenever the moon is full. He wants an ordinary life, finds honest work, and falls in love, hoping human affection can quiet the creature developing inside him. Oliver Reed's transformation became the film's defining image. Thick hair covers his face, his eyes become wild, and his posture changes from frightened man to trapped animal. Even beneath the makeup, sadness remains visible, reminding the audience that Leon never asked for this fate. The rooftop pursuit and bell tower conclusion give the tragedy an almost operatic ending. Unlike many creature films, the audience is not simply waiting for a monster to be defeated. Viewers understand that the beast and the innocent man are the same person. Censors objected to both the werewolf attacks and the grim circumstances surrounding Leon's birth. British approval came only after alterations, proving that moral context could trouble authorities as much as visible horror. The final confrontation hurts, because Leon's destruction does not feel like victory. It feels like the last stage of a punishment that began before he was old enough to understand it. Number 28. The Horror of Party Beach, 1964. Music, dancing, and radioactive sea monsters collide in one of the strangest beach pictures of the decade. When dangerous waste reaches the ocean, dead marine life mutates into creatures that begin moving toward a nearby community. Their appearance became instantly recognizable. They have large eyes, rubbery bodies, and mouths filled with rows of objects that look almost like sausages. The costumes appear ridiculous, but their awkward movements also make the attacks unpredictable. The best-known sequence interrupts a cheerful beach party. Teenagers dance beside the water, while danger rises silently from beneath the surface. Rock music continues as the monsters approach, making it feel as though a light musical and a creature feature have crashed into each other. British examiners initially rejected the film. A version was later accepted after reconsideration and changes, showing how a prohibited movie could become legal once the distributor adjusted the presentation. Its camp reputation often hides the genuine anxiety underneath. Radioactive contamination was not merely a fantasy for Cold War audiences. The monsters may look inexpensive, but the fear creating them came from newspaper headlines, military testing, and the belief that human carelessness could poison the natural world. Number 27. The Horrible Dr. Hitchcock, 1962. Inside a fog-covered mansion, a respected surgeon hides an obsession that even his closest companions do not fully understand. After an experiment leads to the death of his first wife, he leaves the country and later returns with a new bride. She soon hears footsteps inside sealed rooms, discovers hidden passageways, and sees a pale figure moving behind curtains. The house appears to be preserving the memory of the dead woman, while the doctor's calm behavior makes every explanation feel suspicious. One of the strongest scenes unfolds inside a bedroom, filled with red curtains, candles, and funeral decorations. Nothing moves quickly. The tension grows through silence, shadows, and the doctor's unsettling patience. The film's central fixation was considered deeply offensive for the period, leading to altered international versions. American prints were shortened, while other territories received differently edited cuts designed to soften the implications. Director Ricardo Freda uses Gothic beauty to hide something morally rotten. The mansion looks elegant, the clothing appears expensive, and every room is carefully arranged. Yet beneath the polished surface is a man who believes his status and education place him beyond ordinary judgment. The true horror is not that the doctor behaves like a monster. It is that he remains convinced he is a gentleman. Number 26. The Awful Dr. Orloff, 1962. Women begin disappearing from city streets, while a blind servant named Morpho follows the instructions of a brilliant but unstable surgeon. Dr. Orloff claims his experiments are intended to restore his daughter's damaged face, yet his methods leave a trail of fear behind him. The laboratory scenes gave early audiences something rarely shown in respectable European horror. Surgical lights hang over tables, equipment fills the shadows, and frightened captives are examined with the distance normally used for broken machines. A famous sequence sends Morpho through a woman's bedroom window. His pale eyes, stiff movements, and silent approach helped establish the unsettling visual style that director Jess Franco would revisit throughout his career. Different versions were created because censorship standards varied across Spain, Britain, France, and other markets. Suggestive or more intense footage appeared in certain territories, while censored editions removed material authorities considered unacceptable. Beneath the sensational surface lies a familiar but disturbing idea. Orloff uses fatherly love as an excuse for cruelty. He insists everything is being done for his daughter, yet he never asks whether she would want strangers to suffer on her behalf. The film becomes frightening not because the doctor lacks emotion, but because he has turned one emotion into permission for almost anything. Number 25. The Naked Kiss, 1964. Although it is not a supernatural monster film, few dramas from the decade enter darkness as suddenly as this one. A woman named Kelly attempts to leave her past behind and create an honest life inside a small American town. The opening immediately attacks the audience's expectations. Kelly strikes a man with her handbag, and during the struggle, his hairpiece falls away. She looks almost directly toward the camera, turning the viewer into an uncomfortable witness. Later, she finds meaningful work helping children and develops a relationship with the town's admired wealthy bachelor. Everything appears to be moving toward respectability until she discovers a secret hidden beneath his perfect public image. British censors refused the movie a certificate, keeping it away from normal national cinema distribution for decades. Its subject matter was considered far beyond what mainstream theaters were expected to discuss openly. Director Samuel Fuller refuses to present respectable citizens as automatically trustworthy. The outsider with a troubled history becomes the only person willing to confront the truth, while officials initially protect wealth, manners, and reputation. That reversal creates the horror. Evil does not arrive from a graveyard or laboratory. It lives comfortably behind polite conversation, expensive furniture, and community admiration. Number 24. Succubus, 1968. Reality refuses to remain stable around Lorna, a nightclub performer whose stage act mixes fantasy, danger, and control. Away from the club, she moves through strange relationships and dreamlike encounters that may be memories, supernatural commands, or hallucinations. One unforgettable sequence places her before silent figures resembling store mannequins. The performance becomes increasingly sinister as the difference between theater and private desire disappears. Director Jess Franco originally attempted to develop the project within Spain, but censorship objections reportedly made production there almost impossible. The script, imagery, and even proposed title attracted official concern, forcing the filmmaker to look elsewhere. The finished movie feels intentionally disorienting. Conversations seem to begin in the middle. Locations change without warning, and characters behave as though Lorna has entered a nightmare already in progress. Several markets responded to its suggestive imagery and unstable morality with restrictions, cuts, or refusal. Yet its lasting power comes less from what is clearly shown than from what is never explained. Is Lorna controlling the people around her, or is another force controlling her? The film does not provide a comfortable answer. It simply pulls the viewer deeper into her dream until freedom, performance, and manipulation become impossible to separate. Number 23. Mr. Sardonicus, 1961. Behind the walls of a remote European castle lives a nobleman whose face has been frozen into a terrible grin. Baron Sardonicus hides his appearance behind a mask and summons a respected doctor, Sir Robert Cargrave, promising wealth if the physician can restore him. The cause of the condition is revealed through a grim flashback. Years earlier, Sardonicus opened his father's grave while searching for a winning lottery ticket buried with the body. What he saw inside shocked his facial muscles into the expression he can no longer escape. That single idea turns greed into something physically visible. Sardonicus can conceal his crimes, cruelty, and wealth, but his face continues announcing a joy he does not feel. One of the most infamous sequences involves leeches being used as a threat against his wife. British examiners initially refused the film, and a modified version later became acceptable. Producer William Castle also promoted the picture with a theatrical punishment poll. Audience members were supposedly allowed to decide whether Sardonicus deserved mercy. Castle appeared on screen, counted the votes, and announced that viewers had chosen punishment. However, no convincing evidence of a genuinely merciful alternate ending has ever surfaced. The gimmick made every audience feel partly responsible for what followed. People did not merely watch justice, they were invited to demand it. Beneath the showmanship is a cruel fairy tale about a man who believes money should free him from consequences. He hires a doctor, threatens innocent people, and expects science to erase the mark created by his own greed. Even when his face may be curable, his personality is not. The final punishment becomes effective because Sardonicus is unable to imagine a life in which other people are not simply tools for his recovery. Number 22. Shock Corridor, 1963. A journalist named Johnny Barrett believes he can win the Pulitzer Prize by solving a murder committed inside a psychiatric institution. To enter the hospital, he pretends to be seriously unwell and rehearses an invented condition until the doctors accept his performance. At first, Johnny treats the plan like an undercover assignment. He memorizes symptoms, works with professionals, and expects to leave as soon as he identifies the killer. Inside the institution, however, his confidence begins to collapse. 3 witnesses hold pieces of the truth. Each man carries psychological scars connected to racism, war, political pressure, or nuclear fear. Their broken stories reflect a country presenting itself as stable while burying enormous social tensions. The famous corridor sequence transforms an ordinary hallway into a landscape of madness. Rain appears to fall indoors, lightning flashes across the walls, and Johnny struggles against a storm that may exist only inside his mind. British authorities repeatedly refuse the film classification. Its presentation of the institution and direct treatment of mental collapse were considered too disturbing for ordinary cinema release. Normal British approval did not arrive until many years later. Director Samuel Fuller refuses to let Johnny remain a clever observer. By pretending to be unwell for professional glory, he treats patients as material for his career. Every conversation becomes another step toward the headline he wants. Eventually, he can no longer separate the performance from his identity. The murder may be solved, but the victory becomes meaningless because Johnny loses the ability to communicate what he discovered. He enters the hospital searching for fame and learns that some doors cannot be closed simply because the investigation has ended. Number 21. Peeping Tom, 1960. The first scene offers the audience no safe distance. A young woman walks along a London street while the viewer watches through a hidden camera. The photographer follows her into a rented room, and the recording ends when she finally understands the danger standing in front of her. Behind the camera is Mark Lewis, a quiet focus puller who spends his life recording expressions of fear. His childhood was dominated by a psychologist father who filmed experiments on him, teaching Mark to experience life through lenses instead of ordinary human contact. The most disturbing invention is attached to his camera tripod. While filming, Mark forces his victims to see their own terror reflected back at them. The camera becomes a weapon, a mirror, a witness, and a hiding place at the same time. British examiners demanded several cuts, but official censorship was only part of the film's destruction. Critics reacted with extraordinary anger. Reviews treated the production as morally contaminated rather than merely unsuccessful. Its financier limited distribution and sold the picture away. Director Michael Powell, once celebrated for some of British cinema's most visually imaginative films, saw his career severely damaged. The reaction reveals why the movie frightened critics so deeply. Mark is not only a dangerous man, he is also a filmmaker. He lights scenes, chooses angles, edits his recordings, and watches them repeatedly inside a private screening room. The audience cannot comfortably dismiss him as a stranger, because the film keeps connecting his behavior to ordinary spectatorship. When viewers buy tickets to watch Fear, how different are they from Mark, standing behind a camera and refusing to look away? That question proved more offensive than any single image. Number 20. Psycho. 1960. A secretary named Marion Crane steals a large amount of money and drives through a rainstorm, hoping to escape her old life. Her journey ends at the isolated Bates Motel, where a shy young manager speaks nervously about his controlling mother. For nearly the first half, the story appears to be a crime thriller about theft, guilt, and pursuit. Marion watches police cars in her mirror, changes vehicles, and imagines the conversations taking place after her disappearance. Then the film destroys its own structure. The shower sequence changed screen history through editing rather than explicit detail. Rapid cuts, screaming music, running water, shadows, and Marion's collapsing hand created an attack more intense than many scenes that showed far more. British censors required alterations, and other territories also examined the sequence carefully. Alfred Hitchcock protected the surprise with an unusual theater policy. No customer would be admitted after the movie began. Posters warned late arrivals to wait for the next performance. Theater managers enforced the rule, creating lines outside cinemas and adding to the belief that something dangerous was happening inside. That policy later contributed to stories that theaters had locked their doors or interrupted screenings because audiences could not handle the material. In reality, Hitchcock wanted to prevent viewers from entering after Marion's disappearance and asking where the famous star had gone. The stolen money suddenly becomes unimportant, leaving the audience trapped with Norman Bates and the dark house overlooking the motel. The greatest shock is not the final explanation. It is the discovery that the story viewers thought they were watching has vanished, and no familiar narrative rule will protect them from what replaces it. Number 19. Eyes Without a Face. 1960 Professor Genessier appears to be a grieving father and respected doctor, but behind his medical reputation is a secret laboratory. His daughter Christiane survived an accident that damaged her face, and he has become determined to restore it through forbidden procedures. Wearing a smooth white mask, Christiane moves through the mansion like a ghost. Her eyes remain visible, allowing sadness, hope, and fear to pass through an otherwise expressionless surface. The mask became one of European horror's most influential images. It is not shaped like a traditional monster face. It looks calm, beautiful, and almost perfect. That perfection makes Christiane appear less human, even though she is the most emotionally human person in the story. The movie's most controversial sequence presents an operation with calm, clinical detail. There is no frantic struggle, dramatic thunder, or screaming musical score. The surgeon works patiently while the camera refuses to look away. That stillness made the scene particularly difficult for early audiences. It appeared less like gothic fantasy and more like a medical demonstration. International distributors altered the picture. Its American release was retitled The Horror Chamber of Dr. Faustus, and portions were shortened to make it easier to sell as part of a horror program. Yet Christiane is never merely a helpless experiment. As she learns more about the suffering committed in her name, her loyalty to her father begins to disappear. The famous final images release birds into the night, while the mansion's false order collapses. Genessier attempts to rebuild his daughter's appearance, but every experiment destroys more of the trust that once connected them. His failure is not scientific. It is his inability to understand that saving someone's face means nothing if he destroys the person behind it. Number 18. At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul, 1964. A black-clad undertaker named Coffin Joe walks through a Brazilian town mocking religion, insulting frightened neighbors, and declaring that only the continuation of his bloodline matters. He sees fear as a weakness invented to control ordinary people. His long fingernails, formal clothing, and intense speeches made him instantly recognizable. Unlike many horror villains, he does not hide in darkness. He enters public places, challenges everyone around him, and insists that his beliefs are superior. The story follows his search for a woman he considers worthy of continuing his family line. Other people's feelings mean almost nothing to him. Friendship, marriage, and community traditions are simply obstacles standing between him and his personal destiny. His arrogance becomes increasingly reckless during a night when local belief warns that spirits walk among the living. Coffin Joe enters a cemetery at midnight and loudly invites supernatural forces to prove they exist. The cemetery sequence remains the film's emotional center. Wind rises, branches twist, voices move through the darkness, and the confidence of Brazil's most famous horror anti-hero finally begins to crack. Writer, director, and star José Mojica Marins created the picture with limited resources but enormous visual ambition. Religious themes and Coffin Joe's open defiance attracted resistance from censorship authorities operating within a tense political environment. The movie's power comes from making its villain the loudest and most certain person in every room. He does not merely perform cruel actions. He explains why he believes ordinary morality should not apply to him. The ending does more than prove that ghosts may be real. It shows that arrogance can become a prison. Coffin Joe spends the entire film demanding evidence, only to receive more evidence than his mind is prepared to survive. Number 17. The Hand, 1965. A gentle potter lives alone, cares for a small flower, and wants only to create ordinary clay pots. His quiet routine changes when a giant white-gloved hand begins entering his home and demanding that he sculpt a monument celebrating the hand itself. At first, the request appears almost humorous. The hand points, gestures, and behaves like an impatient customer. When the potter refuses, its methods become increasingly controlling. Telephones appear inside his house. Messages interrupt his work. Television screens show the hand watching him. Rewards are offered, then threats, guards, cages, and public ceremonies. The most memorable passage traps the potter inside a golden cage. He receives medals, praise, and recognition as an important artist, but he is no longer allowed to decide what his art should express. Czech animator Jiří Trnka created the puppet film as a direct allegory about authoritarian power. After the political environment hardened, the short was banned in Czechoslovakia and remained suppressed for roughly 2 decades. Its horror contains no monster makeup or realistic violence. The hand stays clean, polished, and almost friendly. It offers success before introducing punishment, making control appear like a generous opportunity. The potter is never ordered to stop creating. That would be too obvious. He is ordered to create only what power approves. This makes the story more frightening for artists, writers, and filmmakers than many traditional horror pictures. The enemy does not destroy creativity. It captures creativity, rewards obedience, and presents forced work as public honor. By the final funeral scene, even the potter's memory has been converted into official propaganda. The hand controls the artist, the artwork, the ceremony, and the story told after the artist is gone. The government that banned the film accidentally proved the film's message more clearly than any review could have done. Number 16. The Diabolical Dr. Z, 1966. A scientist dies after the medical establishment publicly rejects his theory about controlling human behavior. His daughter, Irma Zimmer, refuses to allow that humiliation to remain unanswered. Using her father's equipment, she begins targeting the doctors she blames for his death. Her most dangerous subject is a nightclub performer known as Miss Death, whose stage costume includes long metallic fingernails. Under Irma's influence, the performer becomes an elegant instrument of revenge. She moves through wealthy rooms and private meetings with the mechanical calm of someone acting under instructions she cannot resist. The nightclub performance is the movie's visual centerpiece. Shadows, music, feathers, and metallic movements create something between dance, nightmare, and scientific demonstration. The danger is obvious to viewers, but invisible to the men applauding from their tables. British approval required cuts, especially where physical threat, medical experimentation, and suggestive imagery became too intense for the examiners. Director Jess Franco fills the production with machines, hypnotic patterns, laboratories, and distorted close-ups. Science does not appear clean or rational. It behaves like another form of obsession. Irma claims she is defending her father's genius, but revenge gradually replaces every scientific purpose. She no longer wants to prove that his work was valuable. She wants the people who rejected him to become helpless inside that work. By controlling another woman's body, she repeats the same arrogance she believes society showed toward her family. Miss Death is treated as equipment rather than a person. Even while Irma speaks about justice, the machine follows instructions perfectly. The tragedy comes from the people who believe perfect control gives them moral authority. Number 15. The Undertaker and His Pals, 1966. Three apparently respectable businessmen discover a terrible method for reducing expenses and increasing profits. Two undertakers create new customers, while their restaurant-owning friend uses the same unfortunate victims to supply his questionable kitchen. The movie presents this idea with cheerful music, comic signs, broad performances, and brightly lit rooms. That playful tone becomes almost more disturbing than the events themselves. Viewers are encouraged to laugh at ridiculous business discussions, then immediately question why the situation seemed funny. The film turns professional politeness into part of the nightmare. One notorious sequence follows a woman preparing for bed before masked intruders enter her home. The editing jumps between threat, visual jokes, and the undertakers discussing business as if they are planning an ordinary delivery. Authorities in Louisville, Kentucky, seized a print under a local ordinance. That physical removal gave the production exactly the kind of forbidden reputation exploitation distributors valued. A negative review could be forgotten. A poster announcing that police had seized the film sounded like proof that it contained something audiences had never been permitted to witness. Different versions circulated, with scenes shortened, rearranged, or removed. The filmmakers understood that disgust, comedy, and censorship publicity could support one another. What makes the concept memorable is its attack on professional respectability. The undertakers smile politely, prepare invoices, and perform their duties with perfect manners. Their restaurant partner behaves like an ordinary businessman discussing food costs. No supernatural explanation is necessary. The monsters have simply discovered a profitable system and decided not to ask moral questions. Every stage of their operation becomes more efficient when nobody examines where the customers, materials, and menu items are coming from. The movie may look crude, yet its joke is surprisingly modern. A terrible business can continue for a long time when each participant is responsible for only one small part of the process. Number 14. Corruption, 1968. A respected surgeon watches his fiancée suffer a serious facial injury during a fashionable gathering. Unable to accept the change in her appearance, he begins developing an experimental treatment that offers temporary improvement at an increasingly terrible price. Peter Cushing plays the doctor with exhausted desperation instead of theatrical madness. At first, he appears horrified by what his research may require. Each compromise is presented as the final one. The treatment works, but only briefly. Success lasts just long enough to create the need for another procedure, another secret, and another excuse. The train compartment sequence became particularly controversial. The confined setting, sudden movement, and the doctor's loss of control create a scene far removed from the dignified Gothic roles audiences normally associated with Cushing. British censors ordered cuts involving that attack and other moments. Separate versions were prepared for different markets, strengthening the picture's reputation as one of the actor's most uncomfortable productions. His fiancée is not merely a passive patient. As the treatment restores her appearance, she becomes increasingly willing to encourage the doctor's actions. Their relationship turns into a closed system in which guilt, vanity, fear, and dependence feed one another. He tells himself that he is acting from love. She tells herself that she deserves to recover what was taken from her. Together, they create a moral arrangement in which every new victim can be described as a necessary exception. The title refers to far more than damaged flesh. The surgeon's ethics, the couple's affection, and their belief in respectable society all become corrupted. By the time they understand the full cost of the treatment, neither can honestly pretend that only one person is responsible. The film remains disturbing because it does not begin with a monster. It begins with sympathy. The nightmare grows each time understandable grief is used to excuse an unforgivable choice. Number 13. The House That Screamed, 1969. An isolated boarding school for difficult young women is controlled by Madame Fourneau, a strict headmistress who believes discipline must defeat emotion. Her nervous son lives nearby and is watched almost as closely as the students. The institution appears designed to remove individuality. Doors are locked, schedules are enforced, friendships are discouraged, and punishment can arrive for even small acts of resistance. Then girls begin disappearing. Madame Fourneau treats the incidents as discipline problems rather than emergencies. The remaining students continue moving through lessons and dormitories while the school's rigid routine protects whatever is hunting them. One of the film's most effective scenes follows a student through the sleeping building at night. The camera watches from hidden positions while floorboards creak, curtains move, and footsteps seem to stop whenever she turns around. The attacker is rarely shown clearly. Viewers are forced to search dark corners, doorways, and staircases, never certain whether the danger is in front of the character or directly behind her. International versions were altered. British approval required cuts, while American prints shortened some stronger imagery. The Spanish title, La Residencia, was replaced in certain markets with a more openly sensational horror title. The eventual revelation involves an unhealthy attempt to construct an impossible ideal. Affection has been replaced by ownership, and the school's culture of silence allows the secret to survive. Director Narciso Ibáñez Serrador gives the building its own personality. Staircases appear to lead nowhere, windows offer little freedom, and authority remains present even when Madame Fourneau is not on screen. The institution claims to correct troubled behavior. Instead, repression, secrecy, and fear create the perfect conditions for something far worse. Nobody speaks openly. Nobody questions the official explanation. Students are trained to obey even when they sense danger. The school does not fail because discipline becomes too weak. It fails because discipline becomes more important than truth. Number 12. Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, 1969. Baron Frankenstein no longer resembles the ambitious young scientist seen in earlier Hammer films. He has become colder, more controlling, and almost completely convinced that his work excuses everything required to continue it. After arriving at a boarding house, he blackmails a young couple into helping him recover the research of a former colleague. The colleague is confined inside an institution, unable to communicate his scientific discoveries normally. Frankenstein arranges an escape and later performs an operation designed to preserve the man's knowledge inside another body. Technically, the procedure succeeds. The revived man awakens with his memories and intelligence intact, but his face, voice, and identity no longer match the person he remembers being. The scientific achievement becomes a deeply personal prison. The laboratory procedure is one of the film's most famous scenes. Colorful Gothic equipment surrounds Frankenstein as he works with absolute confidence, treating human identity as something that can be removed, transferred, and reassembled. British examiners requested changes to the operation and other troubling material. An assault sequence, reportedly added after the main production had begun, became particularly controversial and remains one of the film's most criticized moments. Peter Cushing gives Frankenstein almost none of the charm that once made the character fascinating. He enters the young couple's home, controls their choices, and turns every scientific conversation into a threat. The transformed colleague provides the story's deepest sadness. His intelligence survives, but the people he loves cannot recognize him. When he secretly visits his wife, he cannot reveal the truth without terrifying her. The moment becomes more heartbreaking than any monster attack because the experiment has preserved his mind while removing his place in the world. The title promises that Frankenstein must be destroyed, yet the movie demonstrates how difficult that will be. His experiments may collapse, his helpers may resist, and his victims may confront him, but his belief in his own necessity remains almost impossible to kill. Number 11. The Oblong Box, 1969. After an expedition in Africa, Sir Edward Markham returns to England, carrying a secret he believes must never become public. His brother Julian has been disfigured and mentally changed, so Edward hides him inside the family estate while telling outsiders that Julian is dead. Every decision is presented as protection. Edward claims he is protecting his brother, the family reputation, and the people living nearby. In reality, he is protecting his own social position. A plan to help Julian escape goes wrong, and the hidden brother is buried alive inside a coffin. Grave robbers later open it, unknowingly releasing a masked figure determined to punish everyone connected to his suffering. The graveyard escape remains the most powerful sequence. Earth falls onto the coffin, the lid is forced open, and Julian emerges into a world that has already accepted his death. British censors demanded cuts before approving the film. Its colonial background, masked violence, burial imagery, and medical scenes made the production more severe than its respectable costumes suggested. Vincent Price plays Edward as a man whose guilt is mixed with arrogance. He understands that terrible things have happened, but he continues believing that public scandal would be worse than private cruelty. The supernatural curse mentioned in the story becomes less important than the human betrayal surrounding it. Julian is treated like a shameful object long before he begins acting like a threat. Locked rooms, false funerals, and polite explanations cannot repair that humiliation. By imprisoning his brother, Edward creates the very danger he fears. The title refers to the coffin, but the oblong box also becomes a symbol of every secret the family attempts to close and bury. Once it opens, it releases more than one masked man. It releases years of guilt, resentment, cowardice, and decisions made for the sake of appearance. The elegant estate survives for a while, but the moral structure holding it together has already collapsed. Number 10. This Night I'll Possess Your Corpse, 1967. Coffin Joe survives the punishment he received in his previous story and immediately returns to his obsessive search for the perfect woman who can continue his bloodline. His confidence appears untouched. He still mocks religion, dismisses ordinary morality, and presents fear as proof of weakness. Yet the memory of supernatural punishment remains buried somewhere beneath his speeches. He abducts several women and subjects them to tests designed to measure courage. One notorious sequence traps the captives inside a room filled with crawling creatures while Coffin Joe watches to decide who is worthy. The scene is important because it reveals his definition of strength. He does not value kindness, intelligence, or loyalty. He values the ability to endure whatever suffering he chooses to create. The film's most celebrated passage suddenly changes from black and white to color. Coffin Joe is pulled into a vision of the underworld, where icy landscapes, painted bodies, distorted faces, and strange lighting surround him. The unexpected color makes the nightmare feel as if it has broken through the physical limits of the film itself. Brazilian authorities objected strongly to his rejection of religion and reportedly forced the production to change the ending. A final statement of belief or repentance was added, weakening the character's defiance immediately before the conclusion. That interference creates a fascinating tension. The story spends most of its running time presenting Coffin Joe as a man who rejects every spiritual warning. Then censorship demands that he acknowledge the power he mocked. Even with the imposed ending, the underworld sequence remains effective. It does not feel like a simple lesson placed there to satisfy authorities. It feels like Coffin Joe's own mind finally constructing an image large enough to frighten him. He escapes human punishment repeatedly because he understands how to control weaker people. What he cannot control is the possibility that his certainty may be wrong. The final fear is not that supernatural judgment exists. It is that Coffin Joe may have understood this all along and spent his life shouting so loudly because silence would force him to admit it. Number 9. Night of the Living Dead, 1968. A brother and sister visit a rural cemetery when a silent stranger suddenly attacks them. Barbara escapes to an isolated farmhouse, where she joins Ben and several frightened survivors while the recently deceased gather outside. The house should offer safety, yet disagreement becomes almost as dangerous as the figures surrounding it. Ben wants to secure the main floor and search for a way to escape. Harry Cooper insists that everyone should hide in the cellar. Each man believes survival depends upon his plan, turning every practical decision into a struggle for control. Television and radio reports attempt to explain the crisis. Scientists, officials, police officers, and reporters offer theories, but no answer provides real security. The young girl in the basement, the chaotic struggle inside the house, and the documentary-style conclusion gave audiences images unlike conventional studio horror. Because the movie appeared just as the old American production code was collapsing, Age restrictions were inconsistent. Children accustomed to mild afternoon monster pictures could reportedly enter screenings of something far more intense. The film was not simply banned everywhere during its original American release. Its forbidden reputation developed through local restrictions, hostile reactions, later prohibitions in certain territories, canceled bookings, and nervous theater owners. Its final scene remains the deepest shock. Ben survives the night by hiding in the cellar. When daylight arrives, an armed group approaches the farmhouse. He looks through a window, hoping the danger has ended, but the men outside mistake him for one of the creatures. The rescue arrives, yet recognition does not. George Romero ends with still photographs resembling newspaper or police documentation. The images strip away the excitement of the previous night and replace it with cold procedure. The creatures surround the farmhouse, but the final fatal decision is made by ordinary living people who act quickly and never stop to ask what they are seeing. That conclusion transformed the film from a monster story into something much more disturbing. Survival, intelligence, and courage do not guarantee justice. Ben defeats every immediate threat inside the house. He cannot defeat a world that has already decided what he is from a distance. Number 8. Witchfinder General, 1968. During the English Civil War, lawyer Matthew Hopkins travels from village to village claiming that he can identify witches. His investigations bring payment, influence, and permission to terrorize vulnerable people. A soldier named Richard Marshall becomes determined to stop him after Hopkins targets the family of the woman Richard loves. What begins as a historical drama gradually becomes a personal revenge story with almost no room for heroism. Vincent Price abandons the playful theatrical style associated with many of his earlier horror roles. Hopkins speaks quietly, watches carefully, and presents cruelty as professional duty. That restraint makes him more frightening than a loudly laughing villain. He does not behave like someone who has lost control. He behaves like a man completely comfortable inside a profitable system. Village officials accept his authority because he promises to identify a hidden enemy. Frightened communities cooperate because questioning the process could make them appear suspicious. British censors demanded extensive cuts from interrogation and execution scenes. Reviewers were disturbed by the movie's bleakness, while later critics praised the same refusal to turn historical cruelty into entertaining adventure. The countryside appears beautiful, but the natural scenery offers no moral comfort. Fields, forests, and villages simply become locations where accusations are carried out. The final confrontation takes place inside a confined room. Richard's desire for revenge has become so powerful that it destroys any possibility of rescue. His repeated strikes continue until soldiers end the chaos, leaving the surviving woman screaming as the image freezes. There is no comfortable restoration of justice. Hopkins may finally be stopped, but the institutions that allowed him to operate remain larger than one man. The story's horror comes from paperwork, reputation, accusation, and public approval. Hopkins does not require magic or supernatural power. He only needs frightened officials willing to reward anyone who promises certainty. The film suggests that a community looking desperately for monsters may eventually create a profession for the person most willing to point at innocent people. By the time Richard reaches Hopkins, revenge no longer separates him clearly from the violence he wants to punish. Everyone has been pulled into the same machinery, and the final scream continues because destroying one operator cannot repair what the system has already done. Number 7. The Virgin Spring, 1960. A wealthy medieval family sends their beloved daughter Karen to deliver candles to a church. She travels through an apparently peaceful landscape, unaware that the journey will expose the fragile boundary between faith, cruelty, revenge, and grief. Along the road, she encounters 3 herdsmen who initially appear harmless. Their behavior changes, and the film presents the betrayal without the protective distance normally offered by conventional horror. Director Ingmar Bergman keeps the landscape quiet. There is no dramatic monster, supernatural warning, or loud musical signal. The calm surroundings make the event feel more disturbing because nature continues as though nothing unusual is happening. Later, the same men unknowingly seek shelter at Karen's family home. They believe they have escaped responsibility and attempt to sell her belongings to her own mother. Recognition enters slowly. A piece of clothing, a familiar object, and an uncomfortable conversation reveal what has happened before anyone speaks openly. Karen's father, Tura, prepares himself for revenge. In the famous birch tree sequence, he wrestles a young tree to the ground, using the physical act almost like a ritual. His strength appears impressive, yet grief has already removed the moral certainty he believes he possesses. American distributors cut controversial material, and the film became involved in censorship and obscenity disputes, including prohibition in Fort Worth, Texas. Although often classified as a medieval drama, its influence can be seen throughout later revenge horror. Many filmmakers borrowed its basic structure while removing Bergman's spiritual uncertainty. After revenge is completed, the family finds Karen's body. A spring begins flowing near the place where she lies, introducing the possibility of grace or divine meaning. Yet the miracle does not erase anything. Ture promises to build a church, but his promise cannot restore his daughter or make his revenge pure. The water may suggest forgiveness, faith, or mystery, while the people standing around it remain trapped inside grief. The film refuses to tell viewers whether spiritual meaning can truly comfort the family. It asks a more painful question: can faith survive terrible events without becoming an excuse for the terrible actions people commit afterward? Number 6. The Whip and the Body, 1963. A disgraced nobleman named Kurt Menliff returns to his family's seaside castle, reopening old resentments and a dangerous relationship with his brother's wife, Nevenka. Kurt's presence brings fear, attraction, anger, and shame into every room. The family insists that the past should remain buried, yet nobody has truly escaped it. After Kurt is found dead, Nevenka begins seeing him in corridors and hearing his voice in the darkness. Doors open without explanation. Footsteps move through empty rooms. His influence appears stronger after death than it was while he lived. The question is whether his ghost has physically returned or whether guilt, memory, and desire are controlling Nevenka's mind. One moonlit encounter on the beach became the film's defining sequence. Waves strike the shore while Kurt and Nevenka move between attraction and punishment. The imagery went far beyond what some censors considered acceptable Gothic romance. The production faced serious difficulties in Italy and other territories, while international versions removed or shortened material connected to their unhealthy relationship. American releases were heavily altered and sometimes retitled, changing not only the intensity, but also the rhythm of the story. Mario Bava's camera turns the castle into an emotional organism. Blue moonlight fills bedrooms, red light surrounds locked doors, and curtains move as though the building itself remembers Kurt. Christopher Lee plays him with cold authority, but Delia Lavi carries the psychological weight. Nevenka is terrified by the possibility that Kurt has returned and equally terrified that she may want him to return. Her fear and desire become impossible to separate. Each supernatural sign could be evidence of a ghost, but it could also be evidence that she has internalized his control. The mystery's solution does not restore a healthy family order. Whether Kurt's presence is physical, psychological, or both, his influence survives because everyone around him relied upon silence. The castle protected reputation instead of confronting harm. As a result, every hallway becomes a path back toward the same secret. The title emphasizes the objects associated with Kurt's power, yet the deepest control requires no object at all. By the time Nevenka understands how completely he shaped her choices, the castle has already taught her to confuse fear with love. Number 5. 2000 Maniacs, 1964. 6 northern travelers follow misleading road signs into the small southern town of Pleasant Valley. The residents welcome them as honored guests at a centennial celebration, offering food, music, flags, and exaggerated old-fashioned hospitality. The visitors are separated, paired with friendly local guides, and encouraged to take part in community events. Everything appears festive, until small details begin feeling wrong. There are no telephone connections, the roads seem strangely empty, and the townspeople are far too interested in where each visitor came from. The guests eventually learn that the celebration marks the destruction of the original Pleasant Valley during the American Civil War. Its citizens are not simply remembering history. They intend to punish northern strangers as replacements for the soldiers responsible. Director Herschel Gordon Lewis places the town's cruelty beside cheerful banjo music and smiling crowds. Activities that look like carnival games become increasingly dangerous, while residents behave as though every event is harmless entertainment. One infamous sequence involves a large barrel rolled down a hill while the townspeople celebrate. Bright daylight removes the protective darkness normally associated with horror. Everything happens beneath a clear sky, surrounded by laughter, music, and families treating revenge like a holiday. Chicago authorities banned the film in August 1964, and the decision reportedly survived an appeal. The prohibition strengthened Lewis's reputation for producing attractions respectable cinemas would not touch. Advertising could now suggest that officials had tried to protect the public from what was inside the film. The supernatural explanation arrives late, but the deeper fear comes from historical resentment transformed into ritual. Nobody in Pleasant Valley questions the celebration because revenge has become tradition. Children watch adults participate. Music turns cruelty into ceremony. Hospitality becomes a method for controlling victims. The travelers enter expecting harmless regional curiosity and discover a community where every smile is part of the trap. The film's crude humor sometimes makes the horror appear less serious, yet that laughter is essential. Pleasant Valley has turned suffering into entertainment, just as the movie's audience has paid to watch. Every friendly direction leads farther from escape, and every polite invitation brings the visitors closer to becoming part of the town's official history. Number 4. The Cremator, 1969. Karel Kopferkingel works at a Prague crematorium and describes his profession in gentle, almost spiritual language. He claims that fire releases souls from suffering and speaks about death with the calm confidence of a man offering comfort. At home, he presents himself as a devoted husband and father. He enjoys music, speaks softly, and treats his work as a noble service. Yet his fascination with cremation already reveals a personality searching for moral permission. As fascist influence grows, an acquaintance encourages Karel to examine his ancestry, reconsider his relationships, and support the new political order. The cremator quickly discovers that ideology can transform his private beliefs into public authority. Ideas that once sounded eccentric are suddenly useful to powerful people. Director Juraj Herd surrounds Karel with distorted lenses, repeated faces, sudden edits, mirrors, and black comedy. Conversations begin in one location and seem to continue somewhere else. The world gradually feels like a nightmare, but Karel experiences it as a promotion. One haunting passage follows him through a museum filled with figures connected to illness, decay, and death. He smiles politely, while the images around him predict what his philosophy will soon justify. The film premiered in Czechoslovakia in March 1969 and was suppressed not long afterward. It remained unavailable there for roughly 20 years, as political authorities recognized its criticism of collaboration, propaganda, and totalitarian thinking. Karel does not suddenly transform into a traditional monster. He simply accepts each new opportunity to feel important. Career advancement, spiritual language, and obedience allow him to reinterpret cruelty as service. That progression creates the horror. He never believes he has abandoned morality. He believes history has finally given his morality official approval. His family becomes vulnerable when the new ideology begins classifying people according to ancestry. Rather than protecting them, Karel adapts his personal philosophy until betrayal appears almost merciful. The crematorium was once merely his workplace. By the end, it has become his model for reorganizing society. People are reduced to bodies. Bodies become ash, and ash becomes proof that suffering has ended. Karel's language remains soft throughout. That politeness makes every decision worse. The film suggests that the most dangerous collaborator may not be the loud fanatic. It may be the respectable man who discovers that a violent system finally appreciates his private ideas. Number 3. Oni Baba, 1964. War has emptied the countryside of safety and left 2 women surviving among endless fields of tall reeds. They attack exhausted samurai, sell the stolen weapons, and dispose of the bodies inside a deep pit hidden in the landscape. Their actions are not presented as glamorous. Hunger, fear, and isolation have reduced life to a routine of waiting, attacking, selling, and eating. The younger woman's husband has gone to war, leaving her dependent upon his mother. Their harsh partnership changes when a neighbor named Hachi returns from battle. He reports that the husband is dead and begins a secret relationship with the younger woman. The older woman fears losing both her companion and the practical support required for survival. Jealousy, loneliness, and economic desperation become impossible to separate. One night, she encounters a masked samurai. After leading him toward the hidden pit, she takes the frightening face covering from his body. She begins wearing it while pretending to be a demon, hoping to scare the younger woman away from Hachi. The plan works at first. The mask appears in the reeds during darkness, turning religious fear into a tool of control. Then it refuses to come off. When the older woman finally removes it with desperate help, the face underneath appears damaged. The transformation became one of Japanese cinema's most unforgettable images. British examiners initially rejected the film. A cut version was accepted several years later, with objections involving both its physical imagery and its direct treatment of desire, poverty, and social collapse. Director Kaneto Shindo uses the reeds like an ocean. Characters vanish beneath them, paths disappear, and the wind creates constant movement even when nobody speaks. The hidden pit may suggest supernatural punishment, yet the entire world is already a human-made nightmare created by war. Hunger replaces law. Jealousy replaces family loyalty. Religious belief becomes a weapon. Human bodies become resources. The mask does not create the older woman's cruelty. It gives physical form to the fear and control already governing her choices. When the younger woman asks whether the figure before her is human or demon, the film refuses to provide a simple difference. The answer may depend less on appearance than on what people are willing to do when survival becomes their only remaining rule. Number 2. Blood Feast, 1963. A quiet caterer named Fuad Ramses operates a small food shop while secretly preparing an ancient Egyptian ceremony. When a wealthy woman hires him to arrange a feast for her daughter, he sees the invitation as an opportunity to complete his ritual. The plot is extremely simple, but simplicity was part of the strategy. Director Herschel Gordon Lewis was not primarily interested in mystery, psychological depth, or elegant suspense. He wanted to show audiences visual effects that mainstream studios refused to place on screen. The opening bathroom sequence announces that approach immediately. Bright color, close framing, and deliberately excessive makeup signal that this will not resemble the shadowy universal monsters or polished hammer castles audiences already know. There is no attempt to hide the villain's identity. Viewers know Fuad is responsible and understand what he is planning long before the detective. Suspense comes from wondering how far the film will go and whether authorities, distributors, or theater managers will allow it to continue. The investigation remains almost secondary. Fuad moves through ordinary neighborhoods, speaks politely with customers, and prepares for the ceremony while the police struggle to connect the incidents. That contrast makes him strangely memorable. He does not look like a Gothic aristocrat or supernatural creature. He looks like a small businessman performing an unusual service. Britain kept the picture from normal release for many years. It became widely identified as the first major splatter film, establishing a style built around graphic spectacle rather than implication. Critics attack the acting, dialogue, effects, and structure, yet the roughness contributed to the feeling that audiences were watching something created beyond professional supervision. The movie looked like it had escaped from a place where ordinary studio rules did not exist. Fuad's ceremony never achieves the grandeur he imagines. It appears shabby, confused, and desperate. The ancient mythology is less convincing than his obsession. However, the film surrounding him achieved exactly what its creators wanted. It crossed a visual boundary. It survived condemnation. It turned a tiny independent production into a national controversy. Theater owners could advertise it as an experience rather than a story. Audiences entered not because they expected sophisticated filmmaking, but because they wanted to discover whether the rumors were true. That curiosity changed horror economics. Expensive stars and elaborate sets were no longer necessary if a filmmaker could promise images no competitor would show. Blood Feast may look primitive, but its influence is enormous. It proved that censorship controversy could become a marketing campaign, and that disgust could function as a new form of cinematic attraction. Number 1. Black Sunday, 1960. A violent storm surrounds 17th-century Moldavia as Princess Asa Vajda is condemned for sorcery. Before her punishment, a metal mask lined with spikes is placed over her face. She curses her brother's descendants and promises that death will not hold her forever. The opening sequence remains one of the most powerful introductions in Gothic horror. Hooded figures, burning torches, ruined stone, thunder, and the terrible mask create the feeling of an ancient nightmare being recorded rather than invented. 2 centuries later, a doctor traveling through the region accidentally disturbs Asa's tomb. Drops of blood restore part of her strength, and she begins reaching beyond the grave toward Katia, a young descendant who shares her appearance. Barbara Steele plays both women, transforming the story into a battle between identical faces representing life and corruption. Her pale features, wide eyes, and silent entrances created one of the decade's defining horror images. She does not need to move quickly. The camera allows her face to emerge slowly from darkness until the viewer cannot tell whether she is beautiful, dead, or both. Asa does not merely want revenge against the family that destroyed her. She wants to erase Katia and continue living through her body. That makes the final struggle deeply personal. The monster and victim look exactly alike. Director Mario Bava fills the film with drifting fog, twisted branches, ruined corridors, underground chambers, and light that seems to carve faces from darkness. The visual beauty makes the disturbing imagery more powerful. Viewers cannot easily reject the film as a crude shock production because every scene has been carefully composed. The opening punishment created serious censorship problems. British authorities rejected the picture in 1960, preventing ordinary national cinema distribution. It did not receive a British cinema release until 1968, and even then, audiences saw a cut version. During those missing years, the ban transformed the movie into a legend. Horror fans heard about a European production considered too disturbing for British screens, featuring a masked witch, a family curse, and images that authorities had refused to approve. Different markets also changed the title. Some audiences knew it as The Mask of Satan, while others encountered altered versions under names emphasizing witchcraft or revenge. The film itself remained stronger than the publicity. Asa's resurrection scenes use simple effects, shadows, and careful lighting to suggest a body rebuilding itself after centuries. The process is frightening because it appears slow and determined. She does not rise like a sudden attacker. She returns piece by piece, as though the curse has been waiting patiently for the smallest opportunity. Katya's home becomes increasingly isolated, while the boundary between past and present collapses. Family history is no longer something recorded in books. It is moving through the corridors. The final confrontation places the two women's identical appearances at the center of the danger. Saving Katya requires recognizing the smallest difference between life and imitation. For years, censors kept Black Sunday away from British theaters. They could delay it, shorten it, rename it, and prevent an entire generation from seeing the original version. What they could not do was stop the central image from becoming immortal. The spiked mask, Barbara Steele's eyes, and Bava's fog-covered landscapes survived every restriction. The movie that authorities attempted to hide became one of the foundations of international Gothic horror. How many of these forbidden films truly deserve to be hidden, and how many became famous because authorities overreacted? Their bans, cuts, confiscations, and canceled screenings reveal an era when horror was changing faster than censorship could control it. Comment with the film you would have risked seeing on opening night. Like the video, share it with another classic cinema fan, and subscribe, because many more forgotten movies are still waiting behind locked theater doors.